had any real sense of what I wanted to do and a goal that I aimed for. I've never been one of those people. I wished I had been a little bit more focused. I worked developing programs for adults. In an academic nature, I worked in an extramural department of a university, I worked in a college, and I worked in a voluntary association. And so at one level academic, on another level I did a lot of work on community skills for community activists. So I helped people who were not necessarily very well educated, but who were smart, to develop skills, managing meetings, speaking in public, understanding the way organisations operated, helping them really develop themselves in a way that meant they could make more impact and not be browbeaten by people who maybe had had a better education than they did. And what I realised when I was working in those communities was that it was ridiculous them having to turn up every week for 2 hours, because many of them were shift workers, they had families, there were all sorts of reasons why that wasn't always possible. So I started packaging material. So I started writing material, and I got involved in the very early days of open learning, based around the analogues of the Open University in Britain. That was in the sort of late 60s, the Open University was the late 60s, this was the late 70s. And at that point, I began to see how logical it would be to be able to store that kind of information on computer, to recall it. My company made CD-ROMs. It sounds so old-fashioned now, but we won a European Multimedia Award for a CD-ROM we did on career development, for example. And we started to write really good educational software for colleges, but also for schools. And the company was the very first UK company to be bundled by Apple for educational software. So we did a deal with Apple Computer in, I don't know when it would have been, probably late 80s, something like that. And we sold a shed load of software at a very low price, I can tell you. Apple did do, but I think they sold 25,000 machines with our software bundled. That was a lot of software in those days. So I got completely engrossed in the power of learning technology. And then when the internet came along, very, very early adopter. One of the things I do with human resource people is get them to go and talk to the chief technology officer or the chief information officer, because they're often very scared and wary of doing that, because they feel they're going to be bamboozled, or they're going to be browbeaten, or they're just going to be defeated, because technology has such an incredibly big hold on most organizations, and learning comes second in terms of everything, budget, status, power, impact, all of those things. So where the partnership works, it's an incredibly powerful partnership. Where the partnership doesn't work, it can be very dysfunctional, particularly for the learning side of things. I'm also really passionate about the role of big data, and learning people are missing tricks because they just don't get involved. And I'm not talking about data generated by learning, that's one thing. I'm talking about the data that is generated by organizations and their customers, and being able to sift that data and use it for learning focus. There are some great examples where learning people have used completely different sorts of data, customer data, call center data, data on product success or otherwise, and turn that into very powerful learning for the organization with great results. So those things are very, very important now. Learning leaders are serious about wanting to create unique, individualized learning opportunities, unique pathways for every single person in an organization. Then the only way you can do that is interact with data, and the only way you do that is by having access to key bits of data that can be stripped and perhaps anonymized, so that you can't put your finger on an individual, but in some way it will be interpreted and analyzed, and creates a debate and a discussion around the individual. And it's the only way to go. I think the idea of batch processing of people is increasingly ridiculous, because it's clear, it's obvious that people are different, they have different skills, different inclinations, and they demand increasing individualization. So it's quid pro quo. You can't have something that is unique for you without understanding who you are, by definition. And who you are comes through the data more than anything else. And I don't know how you avoid that. I suppose it may be possible you tick a box and say, I'm not interested in all of this. But many organizations will say, if you're not interested in all of this, we're not very interested in you. It will be a do or die for organizations, as they need increasingly to develop human resource. They need to empower individuals. They need to stretch and challenge individuals as well as parts of teams. And they want people to feel that they're being looked after and looked at and helped based around their own needs as well as the needs of the team and the organisation. I think that there are a lot of benefits from a connected age, but there are a lot of things that aren't so great. And one of them is that loss of privacy, that loss of the ability to hide anywhere. It's almost impossible to hide anymore. Would you want to? I don't particularly want to. I know people who do, and I know people who are paranoid about who's watching and who's not watching. One size fits one. And we now can do that. We can manage in general, and we can manage very specifically, but it's data that will drive that for us, and dashboards and following what's going on and what people are doing and where their strengths and weaknesses lie is a critical part of that. I can't see any way out of that, and for the most part it will be benevolent and helpful. And we will need to put in checks and balances and constraints. For example, obliterating certain data after a certain amount of time. So we can do that in organisations. We can retire data after a certain amount of time. Whether we can actually obliterate it, I'm not sure. We're certainly better retire it. So you can be sure that a mistake you made at 21 isn't going to haunt you at 51. But nevertheless, we'll need to know all about all of that stuff if we're genuinely going to focus on you and your needs and get the best out of you. Build your allegiances. Know who your friends are and know who your friends aren't. It's very important. This is not, and you should never do anything on your own. Stick your neck out. I've got to do this. If you do that, often your neck is chopped off. If you build allegiances and alliances, and therefore the corollary is know when to pull back and know when to push forward. And if your alliance is saying to you, "Ooh, I can't support you on this. This looks really dangerous," pull back. When they say, "This is great. I think you should do that," go for it. So you don't get everything you want, but you should really be clear about the important things, how hard to push, and who will help you. If you ask for help, you'll get it more often than you want. But a lot of people feel somehow to prove themselves they don't need to ask for help. Always a mistake. The second thing I say to people is find a mentor. If you can't find one inside the organisation, find one outside. And often you find a mentor by asking. And most people don't find mentors because they don't ask. Or they're embarrassed to ask. Or they don't want to ask. So you need to ask. And the third thing is to have some pretty big stretch targets. That if you just do what's safe, you won't have a very good career and you won't be very successful and you probably won't enjoy it. You enjoy the challenge, the stretch. And sometimes, I've said to people, and it's true of myself, that when you lie in bed at night worrying about how on earth you're going to deliver that, that's probably going to be the best learning you have. It's going to be a great opportunity. If you're comfortable and saying, well, that's all safe and that's nice and I can easily do that, you're not stretching yourself, you're not stretching your brain, and you're probably not stretching the organisation. And those things are not a good idea. And the final message I give to people is that have scouts. Don't think you can find everything out about everything. Scouts are people who are out there who can say, have you seen this? What about that? Oh, I've read this blog on that. Particularly now in this world of massive information. You need people, you can search for stuff yourself, but you really do need human beings who point you in the direction of interesting stuff. Interesting ideas, interesting technology, interesting examples, interesting case studies, maybe interesting people. So if you've got maybe 5 or 6 scouts out there You'll never fall behind. You'll never be surprised by any new technology. And you'll always sound like you know what you're doing. So they would be my tips. I think so. I think that they will be able to move faster and sharper because they have more access to information. I also think that they will have a more can-do-it attitude rather than a polite wait for the organisation to catch up attitude. I think that the old model where we had these blockers in the organisation who could drive you crazy, that they're going fast because they're just not fit for purpose in the modern age. And we need people who think fast, think on their feet, react, debate, share. Those sorts of characteristics are increasingly prevalent in young leaders that weren't there in older leaders, who felt much more that they had to be self-contained, not the compulsion to share that people have now. So I think it's the new leadership is going to be very interesting and will make a massive impact on organisations.
Wow.